As the COVID-19 pandemic rages on in most parts of the world, how are agilists finding meaning and purpose in these troubled times? How can we connect, inspire, and support each other? In days gone by, Caravanserai has provided rest, recovery, and community for travelers along the ancient Silk Road. Similarly, we hope that our Agile Caravanserai episodes will provide rest, inspiration, and hope. We hope each episode will remind us of our shared Agile values and thus bring us closer together. In past episodes, we've heard from Agile Manifesto authors like Jim Highsmith, Kent Beck, and Alistair Coburn. We've connected with captains of industry like Michael Cara from Nationwide Insurance. We've also heard from global Agile titans including Rashina Hoda and Evan Laybourne from Australia and Naresh Jain from India. As we begin to see the glimmers of hope for the end of the pandemic, agilists continue to respond with resilience. This is a time for transformation. I invite you to join me as we continue our journey together. I'm Sanjiv Augustine, and this is Agile Caravanserai. David Anderson is an internationally recognized thought leader and pioneer of the Kanban Methodology. He's the founder of the David J. Anderson School of Management, as well as the CEO of Mauvius Group. David is the author of 7 books on Kanban. His degree in electronics and computer science started him out in the gaming industry, where he then pivoted to the software industry as an acclaimed author, coach, speaker, and consultant. Over the last 25 years, David has worked at IBM, Sprint, Motorola, and Microsoft. David co-created the Kanban Maturity Model, the Fit-for-Purpose Framework, and Enterprise Services Planning. I've known David since the early 2000s, when a group of us co-authored the Declaration of Interdependence for Agile and Adaptive Management, and we also co-founded the Agile Project Leadership Network. One of the key things on which David and I connected very early is the passionate belief that organizations should always be networked with a very thin center, that is, a very small unit in a completely distributed network. That federated mindset imbues all of David's work today. David Anderson. Before we jump into, you have the unique situation that you are, living half time in Austria and the other half in Spain. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in 2018, I sold my house in Washington State, Clallam County, Washington. It's the most northwesterly of the lower 48 states. And I moved to Spain. Partly the driver for that was Brexit. I wanted to remain European. And so establishing myself as a European resident was important before Brexit happened. And I opened a business there, the School of Management Training Center in Bilbao. Bilbao's in northern Spain, so It's Atlantic coast. It's the Basque country, and the Basques will tell you that it's not Spain. And it's famous for a few things. It's famous for its geography, which was featured a lot in the Game of Thrones series. In fact, the house I live, there's two filming locations from season 6 and 7 within just 500 yards or so of the house. So I moved there. I started the company, the training center. And then, of course, COVID happened last year, and I wasn't traveling for a start, and I realized I didn't particularly want to come back to the United States with transatlantic travel and the uncertainty of what was happening with the pandemic in Washington State, particularly.
Yeah.
So we've had a long relationship with the Austrian Alps. The company's been running our partner conference, the Kanban Leadership Retreat, here for 10 years already. And I thought it's quite a good place to come and hide during the pandemic. And now I have an office. I'm sitting in my office here. It's just a small office. We have about maybe 800 square feet here.
Not just in February, we passed the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Agile Manifesto. So the Agile movement has been around for at least that time and longer. You've been involved with it as at least as long and as have I, or longer. So first question is, what are some of your reflections of Agile, Kanban, the whole movement, looking back over the last 20 years?
So it's interesting. It's 20 years, right? To 2021, 2001. You go back 20 years earlier, that was the publication of Software Engineering Economics by Barry Boehm.
Yeah.
And that was an important book in a lot of ways, and it collected together research that Barry had been doing for at least the previous 5 years. A lot of the papers were published in 77, 78. So it had a lot of important results in it, but one of the most influential results was this thing called the cost of change curve. Mm-hmm. And the idea that late-breaking changes in software development are exponentially more expensive than if you catch a failure at the beginning. Right. And that result led to a focus on upstream activities, analysis, design, architecture, and so forth, with the intent of catching problems in the design of software as early in the life cycle as possible. Yeah. Forward 15 to 20 years, sort of mid-1990s, 15 years later, and you see the emergence of really quite heavyweight architecture and analysis tooling, and a lot of what became known as big design up front. And the Agile movement became a rebellion against that. It was like punk rock versus, 70s glam rock. And in that sense, that was a necessary correction. But now, 20 years later, I'm not very bullish about the Agile movement at all. I think that correction was good, but punk music lasted about 3 years, probably less. The post-punk era began in late 1978. Mm-hmm. And most of what people call 80s bands, the really good music from the 80s, they were post-punk bands. They weren't punk bands. And I think the Agile movement really needed a post-Agile, and it hasn't arrived. It's like we've been playing punk music for 20 years. And the problem with that is I feel that we threw a lot of baby out with the bathwater. Mm. And we now have a generation of software developers who are, to be a little pejorative, just hackers. Mm. They don't know how to write requirements. They don't know how to do analysis. They're not very good at design. And their only strategy is write lots and lots of tests. And when the tests fail, refactor the code. And it's like, just throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. And it's like stupid experimentation. It's not intelligent. It's not well informed. And a lot of techniques that were really quite useful and valid from the late 90s are now lost on a younger generation. Hmm. So we've thrown a lot of baby out with the bathwater. And then this whole issue of scaling Agile. And the one end of the argument being, don't try to scale Agile. It was designed for small things. Make your big thing smaller. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's going to work sometimes. Yeah. And then when it doesn't work, well, scaled Agile solutions, they don't appear to work. Mm-hmm. And the evidence is there in the sense that very large companies who've tried to adopt these things are now, in some cases, one big bank in the DC area that I'm sure you're very familiar with is on its fifth Agile transformation. So if the Agile movement had it right, some of America's biggest, brightest, and most successful brand name companies wouldn't be doing it for the fifth time. So I'm not particularly bullish about Agile. I feel that it failed to scale for very understandable reasons that were fairly self-evident in 2002 or 2003 already. In other words, we needed the post-punk movement 18 months to 2 years after punk music put the death to glam rock.
So maybe we needed the post-Agile movement correction at least 5 years after Agile came out, so maybe 2006 or so. So appreciate that perspective. I'll come back to this with our third question. But with the second question, I wanted to know personally, how are you doing in the pandemic? It's been a turbulent world. It's been crazy for all of us in the last 18 months. How's David doing?
Yeah, well, we saw the pandemic coming by late January, to be honest, 2020. And I remember messaging, we use Microsoft Teams at the company, and I sent a message pretty much to the whole company saying, I think this is going to affect us. And nobody really paid any attention. Then about a week later, I got a message from our marketing director who has some friends who work at the airport in Bilbao. And he said, business class traffic is already down 30%. And this is going to affect our business. And gradually other employees began to get on board with that. Meanwhile, I was off on a tour of South America. And then I ended up in our Seattle office towards the end of February, by which point it became really self-evident that it was a pandemic. And Seattle was right. It was like ground zero for COVID in the United States. So we were in the middle of it. Already, all the big Seattle companies sent their workforce home, and we had classes full of people who'd flown in from around the United States. So we spent that end of February and March, and we had phone calls every day with our European office and some other staff who live around Europe. And we figured out what do we have to do? And the first thing was really secure the company, shore up our financial position, acquire any line of credit that we could get hold of, before. And I remember one meeting where I told our team, we need to get in the front of the line, because as soon as everyone else realizes this is a pandemic, the banks are going to have a queue of people, trying to secure finance. So we wanted to secure the company's possession and then communicate to everyone our intent is that we are staying open for business, and everyone keeps their job. Right, we're not laying anyone off, and we didn't pursue the strategies particularly common in Europe of what the Germans call Kurzarbeiten, right, where people were essentially laid off, staying at home, and the government was paying 55, 60, 70, 80, 90% of their salary, depending on which country they lived in and how rich that country was. So we didn't use any of that. We did take a little bit of government soft loans in Spain and the US, but we didn't use any of these schemes. We kept everyone on full-time employment. And meanwhile, by April, our global revenue for Kanban University, the whole of the Mauvius group, Kanban University, David and Sanjiv School of Management, it went to zero. April was zero.
Wow.
And by July, we were pretty much back at 100% of 2019 revenue. And we ended the year at 90% of 2019 revenue. Okay. But we had completely reinvented the company doing online training. And also through the Kanban University Network, enabling all our network partners, accredited Kanban trainers globally, to deliver online training. And there was a lot involved in that, as I'm sure you can imagine. You don't just flip a switch and stuff. Although people did try that, just try to deliver like a physical class with just a camera, and very, very exhausting. So instead, we did a lot more. We developed an online training environment in the back of our website. We shot a lot of video so people can watch the lecture sessions on video. We moved the simulation games into online platforms. And the actual online training sessions are typically only about 2 to 2.5 hours each day. And we split the classes into half days. So a 2-day class became 4 half days. And half of that half day would be watching videos or doing other offline activities. So only about a quarter of the day was online. And that's turned out to be a really successful formula. And the business showed a tremendous amount of resilience. For me personally, I was stuck in Spain basically to the very last day before I had to leave the country for tax reasons, because I'm limited to 183 days in Spain each year. So then I had a choice of, do I go back to the United States, which seemed to be in a bit of a mess, and instead I came here to Austria. And for me, I think the big epiphany is that I don't miss traveling. I don't miss my unpublished level of status with British Airways. I don't miss being able to hand out gold cards to my friends and relatives because British Airways loves me so much. And I actually really appreciate sleeping in my own bed. So, okay, I've got 2 beds, one in Spain and one in Austria, but it's been life-changing for me that I don't envisage going back to the way we were. Yes, we will teach physical in-person classes again, but the globe-trotting type of life that I had for 12 years, that's finished. And I'm really happy about the changes.
As are many of us. So I think with that perspective and that introspection and transformation that you've gone through, both with your Kanban University organization and yourself, third question for you is, looking forward over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what are you seeing and what are your plans?
So there are many things going on with us. The last 5 years have been about the development of our organizational maturity model and the Kanban patterns mapping for that, the Kanban Maturity Model. So that has given me and us as a company a lot of insight into what was holding back improved business agility. And I think the Agile community, you'll see plenty of people publish on things like, you can't get practice adoption if the company culture's no good. And then you may see people saying things like, you can't change the company culture without the right leadership. And those things are correct. But it doesn't tend to go any deeper than that, where actually we've codified all of that stuff. We've codified the culture that you need and how it develops. We've codified the character traits and the behavior of leaders and how leadership maturity improves. And therefore, we now have this understanding of, if you want this outcome of, let's call it business agility, whatever that means, that you can do valuable things quickly and be very responsive and resilient and robust as a business, successful economically, then you need the right culture in place. You need the right practices to deliver the outcome, but the practices don't come without the culture, and the culture doesn't come without the leadership. So our main thrust at the moment is developing that material and bringing it to market. As here in the Austrian office, the sign on the door downstairs says the David J. Anderson School of Management Leadership Development Center. And our intent is to run in-person leadership development workshops here in the Austrian Alps. And potentially on premises for companies. But we really want to encourage them to get out of the office, get away from their devices, and come and spend a few days and really focus and understand this. So that's one area of development. And then in general, what we've been doing with Kanban and enterprise services planning and the fit for purpose framework. Like, the fit for purpose framework came about because some people asked an intelligent question. It was a repeated question. Excuse me, how do we know whether a change is likely to be an improvement. And it turns out evolutionary biology has an answer for that mutations survive and thrive if they're fitter for their environment. So if we can make some assessment of, we're proposing a change, do we believe that change, whether it's a change in a product design, a service design, an internal process, do we believe that change is going to make us fitter for the environment we're in? And that generally has taken me in a direction of sort of organic organizational design and applying evolutionary theory, and also applying some really core physics, applying the general theory of entropy to organizational design. So I've got 10 or 20 years of future intellectual property development there. But the core of it boils down to your organization is a services organization you're running, and it is, whether you like it or not, operating as a network of interdependent services.
That's right.
And for every node in that network, you design a Kanban system. And since the COVID pandemic, the nodes in your network are WFH. They're all working from home. Yeah. So over the next year to 2 years, you'll see us emphasizing this concept of that everyone's a co-located team doesn't really happen anymore. And already we're seeing guidance from psychologists saying, let your people turn off their video.
Yeah.
Well, how about we just let those individuals define their work as a service of one? How do they contribute to their organization as an independent service? And then they have individual Kanban at home. People send them work orders and they process them, hopefully offline, not online like this. And the organization functions as slickly or better than ever it did before, even though you've got this widely distributed work from home audience, with the other side of it being that it should be sustainable for the individuals. And a year ago, people still weren't ready for that. There was this wishful thinking of the pandemic will be over by September. But September which year? And now people are realizing that September came and went, and we're at another September, and we can already see another September, and we're still dealing with Delta. Mm-hmm. And consequently, people are warmer now to this concept of we need to rethink our organization and think about how do we organize with a largely work from home workforce. And I believe that we've got some answers for that. And maybe that's the post-agile era that we've been waiting for 18 years.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So final word of inspiration, hope, encouragement for all your fans out there worldwide.
The pandemic has shown us that resilience matters, that it's important just to keep trying. And what enables someone to get up off the floor and keep trying, it's because they're purpose driven. Yeah. Find some way that you can contribute, whether it's your company or your local community or the wider society, and you will be able to pick yourself up. Yeah. Right? Some altruistic reason that you serve the wider purpose of humanity. And I really believe that purpose-driven people have survived the pandemic better.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me today.